exclusively on ESPN Plus. UFC 313, Saturday. Reigning light heavyweight champion Alex Pereira defends his title against number one contender Magomed Ankalaev, and an explosive lightweight bout between Justin Gaethje and Rafael Pazzi. UFC 313, Saturday at 10 p.m. Eastern. Buy it on ESPNplus.com/PPV.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. From your morning podcast to your afternoon playlist, State Farm knows you personalize your entire day, and that's why State Farm helps you personalize your insurance with the State Farm Personal Price Plan. It offers coverage options that help protect what you care about most at an affordable price just for you. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices vary by state. Options selected by customer. Availability and eligibility may vary.
Welcome to the Sportsman's Voice Roundup, your weekly look at conservation and sporting community news happening across the nation and on the Hill. Thanks for tuning in. This is the TSV Roundup. Welcome in, everybody, to this week's edition of the Sportsman's Voice Roundup, your weekly look at news and conservation from around the nation for the week of March 3rd already. Golly days. Here we go. Our lead story: Wisconsin fund supporting access to sportsmen and women faces reauthorization. That is our lead story, and we will welcome in Bob Matthews for that here in a moment. Other headlines: one chamber down, one to go. CSF priority hunting access legislation sails unanimously through the South Carolina House. Following heavy amendments, the semi-auto firearms ban advances in Colorado. Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus members reintroduce critical hunting access legislation. CSF supports sustainable forestry programs in South Carolina. Finally, more free and discounted hunting, fishing, and trapping licenses introduced in West Virginia. All that and much, much more. Let us welcome in now, though, the one and only Bob Matthews, who is once again on the road. I think for the every week listener, you know the inside joke here. But I think we got it squared away. One of us is stationary and the other is not. So, Bob, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing great, Fred. Thanks for having me on. I'll try to be as quick as possible before I inevitably am kicked off here.
You sound great and you look even better. The audience can't see you, but always putting it on putting on a good look there, Bob.
Um, we need to talk about a good look here in Wisconsin, which would be reauthorizing a very important stewardship conservation fund that exists over there in the Badger State. So,
Mhm.
we talk a lot about on this podcast, and you talk about it, your guests talk about it, the importance of sportsmen and women shouldering the responsibility for conservation funding in America, and through excise tax revenue and through the revenue that comes from them purchasing hunting and fishing licenses. Hunters and anglers are really responsible for the great work that gets done out on our natural resources in America. And you know as well as I do how difficult it is to stand up a what I'll call a supplemental source of conservation funding, right? So one that can work in conjunction with what sportsmen and women are already producing. And that's why it's so important to protect those supplemental funds where they already exist, and that's what's going on in Wisconsin. The Knowles-Nelson Stewardship Fund has been around since 1989. For the close listeners, you'll know that's the same year that CSF has been around. So everything that starts in 1989 needs to be kept around because it's doing great things for conservation. And this reauthorization is not a new battle. It's fought every few years in the Wisconsin legislature. It's usually more so focused on what amounts will be funded. But this is a little bit of a different year, and that's why it's so important for us to talk about why it needs to be reauthorized. The fund is primarily comprised of state issued bonds, but there is also some taxpayer funds that goes towards it, and it is a very well liked program there in Wisconsin. In the print version of the TSV, I linked to a survey that says upwards of 90% of folks in the state are supportive of their tax dollars being used for this purpose. And that's to acquire lands for the DNR. So the stewardship fund um, is there to acquire land that must statutorily is required to be open to hunting and fishing access. So a great thing for hunters and anglers out there in Wisconsin, and there are many states that see themselves as very pro sportsmen, and Wisconsin is right up there with all of those states. Um, there was a recent Supreme Court decision, however, that in that state held that it was unconstitutional the way that the legislature was uh, had some of their oversight capabilities. So when the fund is originally authorized for X amount of dollars, and then the DNR tries to use those dollars to acquire land, previously, if it was over a certain threshold, the legislature would have a say as to whether or not yes, you can make that purchase or no, you can't. So the state Supreme Court held that that was unconstitutional, and so now we're facing a bigger challenge of figuring out, okay, what are the guardrails that we can put in place um, to make this version of the Knowles-Nelson Stewardship Fund constitutional? Make sure that we don't just lose it. If there isn't a deal struck, and there isn't an appetite for keeping it around, it will be very, very difficult to bring something like this back. When we're in other states, like I mentioned earlier, we're talking about how important it is to find alternate sources of funding and conservation, and losing this one here with the Knowles Nelson would be a big hit for hunters and anglers in Wisconsin.
What about it, did the Supreme Court detail was unconstitutional?
So it was that oversight portion. Basically, they're holding that once the legislature authorizes funds to be used by the DNR for acquisition, basically the legislature couldn't continue to have their fingers in that process. So it would go the Knowles Nelson would be authorized, and then the DNR would try to purchase some land. If it was over, I believe, it's $250,000. Then the legislature would have to sign off on it. So they held that sign off portion was what was unconstitutional. So the legislature now is interested in finding out ways that they can rewrite this to make it so that they are comfortable with the land that the agency is purchasing. So rather than that being on the back end in an oversight function, CSF, along with a great coalition of partners, national partners, Ducks Unlimited, Safari Club International, Pheasants Forever, Delta Waterfowl, those ones kind of rise to the top. Lots of in-state groups, too many to list, have been really advocating for coming up with a way that this can be done on the front end, so that there's a list of boxes that can be checked by the agency to make sure, okay, if we're going to purchase this land, then it needs to meet this criteria. Maybe including some local oversight, perhaps, to make sure that it's something that localities want. And this is all kind of an open dialogue with the legislature to figure out how we can change this language to make sure that it sticks around.
Yeah, I imagine something that's so, popular, given that survey with the citizenry that the constituents of that legislature are gonna voice their opinion and motivate them to find a way. Curious, I mean, I hate to go down this road, but, if this didn't go well, the funds that are there currently, what happens to that? Because naturally, your half glass full folks there in Wisconsin are gonna say, "Well, it's a money grab. Somebody is looking to fleece this fund and do something with it." So if those funds are dedicated to do this right now, and we have an issue at the judiciary in states, if that all goes the wrong way, where do the current funds go?
It's a great question. The situation there in Wisconsin is that they have a governor of one party, and the legislature reflects another party, right? So when they try to come together with a budget, it's not everything that's in the original budget makes it into the final budget, right?
Sure.
So one avenue that we've been talking about, the coalition that is supporting this reauthorization, is saying, okay, well, maybe if we're not going to acquire new funds, maybe this money can be in this iteration of the Knowles Nelson's reauthorization. Maybe these funds can be used to improve the land that's already been acquired, right? Improve boat launches, make sure that there's more boots on the ground to improve the habitat that has already been acquired over the last, in it's like I said, it's in its fourth decade of doing this for folks in Wisconsin. So that's been one angle that we've brought up in discussions with legislators. There was a great showing. It was actually the last time I came on the podcast, and I was talking to you from a hotel room. I was just on my way over to the Capitol building there in Madison, where there were tons of in-state folks that were there and having meetings with legislators expressing their support, like you just mentioned with that huge constituency that's in favor of using their taxpayer dollars for something that they really care about there in Wisconsin.
It always seems like, when a citizenry, you're thinking about, Wildlife Restoration Act, subsequent ones that come after that, right? We look to do this stuff on and put it on our backs, like you mentioned at the top, and how we cover that almost weekly. And somebody somewhere inevitably has a problem with it, and it's like, no, 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 no. We're asking for this. We want this because we see value in what these dedicated funds are doing.
Mhm.
Uh, and oftentimes it is uncovered that, somebody wants a piece of that pie to fund something else. I'm not saying that's the case here, I'm not implying that, but what I am saying is that in the past that there are ulterior motives, and, I guess if your citizens are telling you, "We want this," and they're finding a way to fund and saying, "Yeah, let's dedicate our percentage of our tax dollars there in state," you ought to leave it alone. So what's the next steps here?
Well, I think that's a really important point, and it leads to the next steps. It's just making sure that the folks that are impacted by this fund are making it clear um, to the folks that have the power to reauthorize it that it is one of their priorities. So that's what this coalition that was formed there in Wisconsin is intending to do, is to make sure that the sportsman's voice is all rallied around behind the same message, and that that's being delivered to legislators. So you know CSF and our partners, that's what we're working to do. We're working to make sure that through the caucus and through our connections with folks in the Capitol building were able to convey that message. Um, It'll be interesting to see what happens. The governor did propose his budget, and it was $100 million in each of the next 10 years. So that'd be $1 billion for this fund. But if I'm being honest with you, we need to make sure that it sticks around. And I don't think that number will end up being that gaudy. But we got to make sure that um, the legislators do know that it's something that their constituents care about. What we need to make sure is that it's important enough to their constituents that we got to overcome any political differences and make sure that conservation rises above those politics, because particularly in Wisconsin, it absolutely does and should.
I mean, the work we do and what we do at CSF, we always talk about it transcends party lines, and that's true. And the same thing here. I mean, the work that this does and the land it sets aside, it's for all citizens. So everyone in Wisconsin, whether they know it or not, are benefiting. But I suspect from the poll results there, they're well aware. It is curious, Bob. This thing is from 1989. It's made it this far in its life, and all of a sudden, someone's got a problem with it. I can't imagine the Supreme Court was sitting around with nothing to do and like, hey, let's look into this thing and see if it's constitutionally authorized. Someone obviously got a burr under their saddle about it, and got to somebody in your judiciary there. Um,
Yeah,
and
I'll be
curious.
honest, Fred. Sorry to cut you off on that, but it is a long story that would eat up the entirety of this podcast. But yeah, I mean that's the truth of it. Is that like you said, we're working on policy, but politics
Yeah.
is intertwined into it, and that Supreme Court decision is very much so of that thread. However, we just got to deal with the cards that are in front of us, and we got to play the hand that we can, and that's making sure that this stewardship fund is reauthorized. It has been eroded. The funds that used to be allocated to it are not as strong as they once were, and so it has been sort of a trend that there has been less support from the legislature, but we want to make sure that we understand that there are still allies in the legislature who support the fund, and that's what CSF and the other groups that I mentioned are working on, and the in-state groups are we're all committed to making sure that we can continue to provide access to folks who are out there hunting, angling, trapping, and make sure that those opportunities can be as good as possible out there in Wisconsin.
No doubt. Well, it sounds like you got a hell of a coalition put together. Uh, we'll look forward to future reporting, and hopefully it's positive reporting at that. Bob, it's great to see you. Glad for the gremlin-free broadcast here today, and thanks so much for your time.
I can't believe that I made it through a whole segment without being kicked off. That I think that's the first time I've actually heard you say goodbye to me. But thank you for it. I appreciate it.
All right, do good work. Thank you.
Bye.
All right, my thanks to Bob one more time. Appreciate the time on his busy travel schedule there, doing the work he's doing in his area of the country. All right, let's get on with the rest of the news. This update from Connor Barker out of South Carolina. As reported on last week, South Carolina Legislative Sportsmen's Caucus co-chair and NAS Executive Council member Representative Bobby Cox and caucus co-chair Representative Heather Bauer introduced House Bill 3872, which would limit the loss of available acreage open to hunting for South Carolina sportsmen and women. First reported favorably out of the House Wildlife Subcommittee on February 18th. House Bill 3872 was subsequently reported favorably by the full House Ag, Natural Resources, and Environmental Affairs Committee, and was quickly followed by a unanimous 110 to nothing yes vote on the House floor. House Bill 3872 will now head to the Senate for further consideration. The article goes on. Connor highlights what we talked about last week, what the requirements are. HB 3872 applies to South Carolina managed lands, which are defined as lands owned by the state in which South Carolina Department of Natural Resources holds management authority and are enrolled in the Wildlife Management Area Program. And then it gives a whole list of the provisions that also apply under 3872. Don't want to rehash that. You can go check it out. Covered it last week, but the bill is moving. It's advancing. So this is a good update, a quick update out of South Carolina. So hopefully Connor continues to bring the good news on that no net loss bill there. And we hope to report on that soon. All right. Following heavy amendments, the semi-auto firearms ban advances in Colorado. Barry Stell always bringing us the happy news out of the West. Colorado SB 25-003 or SB3. Many semi-automatic rifles and shotguns commonly used by American sportsmen and women in hunting and recreational shooting. However, after multiple rounds of amendments, SB3 now seeks to impose new permitting requirements for gun owners. Modern sporting rifle and semi-auto shotguns are not only important to hunting, but are highly popular in the rec shooting community, which is widely credited as a source of roughly 80% of the conservation funding generated through the Pittman-Robinson Act. This legislation would severely undermine our hunting heritage, firearm rights, and would negatively impact American system of conservation funding. In its original form, SB3 would have outright banned the manufacture, distribution, transfer, or sale of semi-automatic firearms that accept a detachable magazine. Current owners of these firearms would have been grandfathered in, but future transfers would only been allowed to direct heirs, someone outside of Colorado, or to an FFL. Following several rounds of amendments in the Senate, SB3 has been softened to now allow people to continue to purchase and own the affected firearms following participation in firearms safety training program and a test. SB3 is now waiting for a hearing in the House Judiciary Committee, where it will likely have an easier time than in the Senate. As reported previously, the anti-gun members of the Colorado legislature kicked off the 2025 legislative session with yet another gun ban bill. Following intense behind-the-scenes pressure on the legislators from the sporting conservation groups like CSF, firearm advocacy groups like our partners at the NRA and NSSF, and tremendous participation in the public testimony process by scores of Coloradans. Senators were convinced to change SB 3 significantly before leaving the upper chamber. SB 3 received several amendments in the Senate Judiciary Committee. SB 3 by no means is good legislation now. However, it is certainly less onerous. The main change being that now, rather than outrightly banning semi auto firearms that receive detachable magazines, folks in Colorado may still buy and own these common types of firearms just as before. However, to do so, should this SB 3 pass, Colorado residents would have to pass either a hunter safety course and a new firearm safety course to uh, be managed by Colorado Parks and Wildlife, or take a yet undefined 12-hour firearm safety course. Both paths will naturally include more fees, more fingerprints, and yet more unnecessary background checks on top of ones already required when purchasing firearms from an FFL. The passage of Senate Bill 3 will likely have a cooling effect on participation in hunting and shooting sports, which in turn has a negative effect on conservation funding and scientific wildlife management in Colorado. Last year, nearly $90 million of revenue was raised for Colorado Parks and Wildlife from hunting licenses alone, and the 2024 distribution of PR funds will likely exceed 24 million distributed to Colorado in 2023. Any prohibition on the possession, transfer, and sale of some of the most commonly used firearms will depress participation in hunting and recreational shooting and eliminate a large portion of the contributions of PR fund, together resulting in millions lost in revenue for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. The financial impact doesn't stop there. Colorado, just wait, there's more. Colorado is facing at least a $1.2 billion budget shortfall this year and growing. Given that this new version of SB 3 will increase the manpower and financial burden on the state agency, the local law enforcement and local law enforcement by requiring parks and wildlife to create and administer a new gun safety program and force sheriff's department to perform more background checks and fingerprinting, Senate Republicans requested a fiscal note from Colorado Legislative Council. The fiscal note now estimates that, if passed in 2025 to 2026 alone, SB 3 would over half over $500,000 to the Department of Natural Resources from the Wildlife Cash Fund, 1.6 million to the Department of Public Safety from the CBI Identification Unit Cash Fund, and 4.6 million appropriation from the general fund to the Department of Public Safety. Colorado literally cannot afford to pass this horrible bill. Not to mention the untold cost to Colorado attorneys general's offices that will lay on the taxpayer while defending the questionable constitutionality of the bill over the next several years. The CSF has opposed legislation like SB 3 in Colorado and elsewhere and will continue to do so. As we get more information on this complete dumpster fire of a bill, we'll bring it to you. Barry will provide. What is going on in Colorado, man? I can't figure it out. You guys are just getting railroaded out there by just really, really poor policy or attempts at it. It's maddening. I mean, just the figures alone to execute this foolishness is it's ridiculous. Look forward to having Barry on at some point to discuss this, and I'm sure that it'll be highly informative, as only Barry can provide. But we got this stuff going on all over the country, and it's just, it's enough to keep up with it and report on it, but just, Colorado just keeping their feet firmly in the, well, in a pile of something anyway. Gosh, work cut out for us out there, and guys like Barry and in-state partners are working their backsides off to thwart this stuff. And anyway, let's see what else we can get into here. Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus members reintroduce critical hunting access legislation. Let's go down to the Hill. The bipartisan Voluntary Public Access (VPA) Improvement Act was recently introduced in both the House of Representatives and the Senate by CSC members Representatives Dingell and Johnson, Senators Daines and Bennett, and Vice Chair Senator Marshall. The VPA Improvement Act would increase VPA HIP funding to $150 million over the life of the next farm bill, while including the program in the farm bill's baseline, ensuring its inclusion in the bill moving forward. The VPA Improvement Act is one of CSF's top priorities for the next iteration of the farm bill. Last week, the leaders and members mentioned above, uh, as we covered, reintroduced Voluntary Public Access Improvement Act, linked in the print edition of the Sportsman's Voice. Improvement Act would increase the Farm Bill's voluntary public access habitat incentive programs to 150 million, as we said, while adding the program to the Farm Bill's baseline. The provisions of the VPA Improvement Act have long been a priority of CSF, given the program role in promoting public access for sportsmen and women while rewarding landowners who voluntarily enroll their property in the program. Through VPA HIP, state fish and wildlife agencies apply for program funding to create state-led public access programs. Landowners in participating states can then enroll their property, permitting public access for outdoor recreation in exchange for financial and technical assistance. Landowners retain the ability to set the terms for access on their property, ensuring the property rights are protected. As one of the most limiting factors facing sportsmen and women today, providing access to quality properties through programs like this are widely supported by the sporting conservation community. Further, participating landowners across the country have reported a high level of satisfaction with the program as well. Recognizing this, ASF applauds the reintroduction of the VPA Improvement Act and will continue to support the priority legislation inclusion in the next farm bill. Yeah, man. Whatever's going to keep some land open, because we got a problem across this country with access, and probably for another show, I have John Colclaser on to talk about it. But golly days, I mean, it's where I live, it's an anomaly. We get for as small spaces we got a lot of land we can play on by virtue of our land sharing traditions, which will not last forever. Due in part to people immigrating from other states, posting land, um, traditional large tracts of lands being cut up into 2-acre parcels so that, $400,000 homes can go up on. It's hard to look at someone in the eye that's land rich and then, try to convince them. So the fact that we got programs like this, some people may bristle at it, but we, to keep access open is what's going to continue to make all this stuff continue to work. These programs help conservation, help people have access, help people buy licenses, right? So you see where this is all going. Well, there's got to be some incentives, some breaks to the landowner and help them out. Um, or again, I think I've covered it in the past where I live in New Hampshire, we have some tax based incentives through land being termed in current use. There's different levels of that, but um, we got some pretty high property taxes in the live free or die state, like really high property taxes. We're tax free, right? With no sales tax and stuff like that. But holy smokes, our property taxes are just insane up here, right? So um someone with a large parcel of land, hundreds and hundreds of acres, that doesn't want to pay all the taxes per acre. Leave it open and available for outdoor recreating, hunting, fishing, trapping at all. That's a pretty good program there. But this here, what we just covered, is good. And like I said, um, you folks, most of you listening to this, have this problem between land leasing and your clubs and everything that's got land locked up, and then everyone complains about, the public land that does exist just not being of quality because it's jam packed full of people, and we'll definitely hear about that now that turkey season's kicked off in the South, and you hear of the quality of the hunt going down, or people complaining about less gobbles, right? I mean, people go turkey hunting for the gobble and fill a tag afterwards, but this whole quality of experience, quality of the hunt. Speaking, gotta have these open spaces. So, definitely applaud these programs that create these cooperative efforts. Landowners helping us out, making their land available to access, and I think it's a good thing that we can help them out and what the programs provide. Hopefully, we get a farm bill done. More to come on that. All right, a couple more stories and we can wrap it up here. CSF supports sustainable forestry programs in South Carolina. This from John Colclasure. Several recent mill closures in South Carolina threaten the state's forestry industry, which jeopardizes conservation, wildlife habitat, and access for sportsmen and women. A strong forest industry is critical to ensure that forests are managed sustainably to maintain economic viability and help prevent conversion of forests to other uses. In the last month, on the 27th, Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation submitted a letter to the Natural Resources and Economic Development Subcommittee of the Senate Finance Committee in support of South Carolina Forestry Commission's budget request to support its forest business recruitment, forest health, and forest land conservation programs. Active forest management is key to improving forest health, reducing wildfire risk, and improving wildlife habitat. But the ability to manage forests depends strongly on the forest industry that enables landowners to generate revenue from the timber harvest and other treatments. The decline of the forest industry in South Carolina led the South Carolina Forestry Commission to request funding to create a forest business recruitment position charged with mining projects and recruiting businesses to the state to support its forest industry. South Carolina Forestry Commission also requested funding for the forest health, prescribed fire, and wildlife management programs, which are important for actively managing the state's forest resources and supporting landowners managing their forests. Additionally, South Carolina Forestry Commission requests funding to strengthen its forest land conservation initiatives by expanding capacity to leverage federal and private dollars to acquire properties for the state forest system to hold conservation easements on working forests. CSF strongly supports these budget requests and encourages the South Carolina legislature to approve them to support the state's forest industry that is vital to managing and conserving the forest throughout the state that its citizens depend on for hunting and fishing access. Finally, we go a little northwest here to Virginia, West Virginia. This from Kaylee Leager. More free licenses. Senate Bill 152 and 153 are two examples of legislation that have been recently introduced that will give specific groups, individuals free hunting, fishing, or trapping licenses. States must receive the net revenue of $2 from each license to report a certified license holder, which qualifies for additional federal funds. West Virginia DNR receives funding from sportsmen and women generated through dollars of the ASCF. CSF is submitting a letter to the Senate Committee on Natural Resources requesting an amendment that includes our reimbursement model language that we've talked about here in the past as a key priority for us here at CSF. From the cold water streams that are home to some of the nation's most stunning and wild native wild and native brook trout in the east to the eastern turkey once again roaming the mountain ranges. The mountain state is littered with magnificent wildlife and natural resources that must be actively conserved. Legislation that impacts conservation funding through usually unintentional poses a risk to our beloved natural resources, Kaylee states. Um, Not to bemoan the issue here. You guys are well versed in this, and I feel like every week we're covering this one too. This is happening in West Virginia. And as you guys well know, we have a solve for this, and we want everyone to win. We want the special groups that are identified that are deserving. Um, as lawmakers look to advance certain constituencies to help them out. We want to make sure that the state agency continues to be funded, so it's helping everybody out, right? And again, take those dollars out of the system. You got to replace them, and we've got that solve. Kaylee and the Legislative Sportsmen's Caucus working together there in West Virginia to try to see that everyone wins there. So more to come out of West Virginia. Again, this is all over the country. We're dealing with this, and take it as it comes, and continue to educate folks on the ramification of those free licenses, and advocate for the preferred language again, so everyone wins. All right, that's it. My thanks to Bob again. Thank you to our contributions from CSF staff, professionals out there in the country, in the state houses, working these issues, good, bad, and otherwise. We thank you for bringing us along. It was a tremendous February. Thank you guys so much for the growth we saw in the program. Those of you that are engaging and tracking the capitals, we appreciate that as well. Rolling that out last month. You guys can do that. Like I say every week, go to congressionalsportsman.org, sign up for all the freebies. Cost you nothing. A few minutes of your time. Get the TSV every week for free, the print edition, so you can use it as reference material when you're listening to this program. Every time I call out a link, you can go there, link to it, do your own personal homework and study. Tracking the capitals, you're gonna, depending on where you're living, what you're interested in, track the bills we're tracking, and be engaged. Use these things as a resource. That's gonna be it. Feature podcast drop this week. Tune in. We're gonna bring you some of the sounds from our celebration, the recognition of the 118th leadership, the incoming 119th leadership of the CSC. We sit down with Congressman Westerman, Pfluger, Senator Bozeman, Congressman Carter, and bring you some of those conversations. And what's really nice about these conversations, it's just a great illustration of what we always talk about, is that our issues transcend partisanship. So much of that is on display in recent, which really, if we're being honest, for the last bunch of years, but it feels extra right now, right? But fortunately, we are that little nice place you can go, and that is conservation. That is hunting, fishing, trapping, recreational shooting, sporting community, uh, where where we just all want to have nice places to go and enjoy and have great experiences. And we can continue to put those good pieces of legislation on governors and presidents' desks. That's all the better. So we'll do it all again next Wednesday. Thank you so much, as always, for bringing us along. As always, CSF is your inside connection to outdoor legislation. See you next week. Thanks for joining us on this edition of the Sportsman's Voice podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, your support is crucial, and you can help us out right now by leaving a review, filling in those 5 stars where available, sharing this episode with friends and family, and engaging with us socially. CSF can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter. Together, we can protect the outdoor sports we love and continue to keep you informed wherever you are. That's it for this week. Until next time, we'll see you later.